Right, welcome to this episode of Women in Rugby League. And I am really excited and thrilled to have an absolute legend and pioneer here today, who was around when Halifax women, who were one of the first, were the first team to play in the Challenge Cup against Crossfield, and actually a really rich history in Halifax, being one of the first team and a very successful team involved. And Lindsay was involved right from the start in the mid to late 80s. So welcome, Lindsay England.
Good morning or
Good
afternoon
morning,
or
good
where we
morning,
are.
whatever we are. Yeah.
I won't say it's that exciting, and it's a while since I've been called a leg end, but there you go.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's where us women undersell ourselves, I think, with all the work we're doing. So let's just crack on. How did you get involved in rugby league? So were you born, where were you born initially? What got you involved in playing at Halifax Ladies?
Well, where I was born was a little village high up on the hills in between Halifax and Bradford called Queensbury.
Oh, know
And
it well.
luckily, I was born on the right side of the village because some people were born on the side of the village, and if you were a dirty Leeds fan, and you supported Bradford Northern. Now, luckily, I was born on the right side of the village, so I followed Bradford City down to Ballyparade, and that meant that I was a Halifax RL fan.
Ah, right, fabulous. So you were already sort of excited and involved in rugby. So how did you get involved in the team then? How did you hear about the team setting up and
Well, I just used to go watch the men's games up at Thrumall and I'd never touched a rugby ball in my life, to be honest. But I love watching the game and everything, and I did go up to Oswald quite a few times, probably more for the speedway than the to watch Northern, as they were back in those days. But I went like with uncles and things like that. So I'd watch any sport really, still do to this day.
yeah.
Any sport, I pretty much watch anything, especially live. So yeah, just followed the men's game, and I remember probably mid '87 in euphoria off the back of the men's team winning the Challenge Cup final and things like that. We seen some sort of an advert that had been in the Halifax Courier or an article or something about a women's charity game that had happened on that, and I think myself and a few others then had realised there was scope and there could be a team set up and we could do something. I remember there was probably a few training sessions or whatever happened, and I signed up with them. I think it was the September that then in '87, and we started just training. And that was first time it was up at Illingworth Rugby League Club, which is just up the road from where I lived. So went along there and never looked back really. Had 5 years of being covered in mud and broken fingers and all sorts of other ailments, and that absolutely loved it and enjoyed it, but then unfortunately got a cruciate ligament injury. And
Right.
as we know, back then my name wasn't Gaza and I wasn't worth £8 million and signing for Italian clubs, so they didn't care. You went to hospital and it was like, women playing sport again, why have we got to deal with this? You shouldn't be doing that. I got the choice of having the very basic ACL operation back in those days and being out of the game for 2 years. That would have meant that I would have been on crutches for some time, so I would have had to give up work and everything, had a mortgage, or everything that went with it. You couldn't get insurance and stuff like that back in those days. Or they gave me, in the end, some physio rehab for 6 months and sort of like packed me off and then see how you go. There was no guarantee anyway, even if I'd have had the op, that I would have been able to play any sort of sport again. So I just persevered and I just carried on having the rehab, but I knew my knee was wrecked by then. It got better eventually, and that I still played a little bit of badminton. I played a little bit of recreational football, being a goalkeeper, and that I played for the local work side at five-a-side, and I'd kick abouts over the years for the next maybe 10, 15, 20 years with various recreationals teams that I played it in, usually men's teams that I just joined in with and that, but never touched a rugby league ball again, other than the coaching that I did for a couple of years once I'd retired from playing myself.
Well, we'll come back to that because I'm really interested in that, and sort of chatting about that. But the early years, so we now know, because we're doing loads of investigating, we're beginning to put timelines together, and we know there was quite a lot of friendlies and charity matches. As you've just said, that Halifax, there was a charity match in Halifax where the women really began to then engage in setting up a team. We now know the season started in 87, so 86, 87 season, with some fixtures beginning in that December. And we've been piecing it together actually today, haven't we? And Halifax joined the league in 1988, 89. So that would have been sort of the first season. Tell us a bit about that first season, what it was like, where you were training, a bit more about the support you got from Halifax Rugby League Club as well.
Yeah, so we were based up at Illingworth Rugby Club for a bit, and then we moved down onto Heath, which was a rugby union ground and that, but our coaches and that at the time were playing rugby union. I think to this day they still have 4 men's teams and that down there, and if I remember rightly, quite a lot of the lads that played in those teams were qualified in coaching and things like that, and a few of them played in the good Wakefield setup as well, which were like semi-professional in those days. And we did quite a lot of training actually with some of our players and some of those coaches from Heath who were in the fire service. So I remember we did quite a lot of like underwater training, because that's how the fire brigade and that played.
Was that for your muddy pitches that you were going to be playing on?
Yeah, we needed that sometimes down at Heath, and that it was quite a bit of a flat pitch down in Elland, and 1 or 2 amenities overspilling into the river close by. Want the greatest of playing areas and everything and that. But we just got on with it. We just wanted to play the game, and that we used to train Mondays and Wednesdays. I'd be in the gym Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday morning, and then we was rolling around the rugby fields of Yorkshire and Lancashire then on a Sunday afternoon. And I just loved it. Just loved it, and everybody else did. I think it was, you go to a team and you're playing sport, and it's just like one big family. It really is, and it gets under your skin, does rugby league a bit once you get into the game and that and everything, and it just carries you through the week. It's hard work, it's hard graft, but we just loved every minute of it, and we made the most of it as well. We celebrated everything. We fully enjoyed everything that we were doing and fully embraced everything that we were doing. And to a certain extent, especially when you look at women's sport as a whole, and even athletics who are top of at the very best, so those elite athletes and that, even to this day, like the Great Britain squads and you see in the Olympics that are kicking off later today, they'd never really get the focus, and you never really get the stories behind them and that. But back in those days, to say it was like the mid to late 80s, we've had a lot of support locally, especially around Halifax. Now, whether that's been down to a small town and that, and it was something to cheer and something to embrace, and that, as far as I was concerned, women supporting football and rugby league in those days, you was always welcome through the turnstiles and things anyway. Yes, there was comments, yes, there was things that said, but I think they knew that we could hold our own in a conversation or anything, and I think there's a few blokes back in the day that knew that we knew what we were doing and we knew what we was talking about. So when we established the team, the sort of like, particularly the club up at Thrumwall, and the support that we had from the local businesses, again, because rugby league's very much a community set up and community organisation, and still is to this day, because there's not the investment that we're seeing in other sports. Yeah, it was fully embraced, and the media were great as well in those days.
I know, and thanks. If anyone wants to see yours and particularly Julie Archer's scrapbooks, which we'll be interviewing Julie Archer in a couple of weeks, who both of you involved in those early days of Halifax, the amount of press coverage that you got, but also how you were hailed in the local community because of that. You were all celebrities, weren't you?
We certainly were, and I think to this day there's still some photographs around in some of the pubs and the bars and that around in Halifax. I think there is still down at the Shay somewhere as well. Maybe it's a while since I've been down there. It's 7 or 8 years, I think, since I've been down to see a game. But I think like in the players' lounges and that and the back rooms, I think there's still some photographs around. Back in the day, we was at the Bass House, the Brass Cat, the Sportsman, the George, and the Plummet Line after training and after games and that. So they embraced us, and we had our photographs, individual photographs and team photographs all across these here framed exhibits, as they were mini exhibitions across the pubs and that, so people knew who we were. When Halifax then went back to the Wembley, so the season they lost it then, that second season at Wembley, when they lost the Challenge Cup final, and that we were all still celebrating together as we had done with the men. I remember the men coming back in '87 after they won it, and we were all just round Bull Green area of Halifax, and they had the trophy, and everybody just throwing every bit of beer they could from every pub, and we just went from pub to pub, and nobody bought a pint all night because you were just handing the trophy around and drinking what you wanted out
Oh,
of the
that sounds my
trophy.
sort of a night, being a tight Yorkshire woman.
And so we were already embedded into that culture. We had that in us. We knew what it meant, and we just carried it on. Yeah, we were just women doing what we love and what we wanted to do. We didn't have any financial help behind us. We all dug deep, and we paid for everything other than I think Bob, I think his name was, Russell Dean Carpet sponsored our kit, and that was it. That there was nothing too much really coming the way of sponsorship. It was down to ourselves, going out with begging bowls effectively and that. But we all put in together, and we all looked after each other. If somebody were a little bit short one week and things like that, we sorted each other out. And like you're saying with Julie, myself, Julie, Helen, Robert, Shaw, we sort of like, between the three of us over like the 5 years that I was involved with the team, we were all like treasurers and secretaries and doubled up and things like that. And the kit, myself and Helen, I think I've lost count of how many kits we washed and things like that. But yeah, we all got through it together, and we all looked after each other, and we just were that one big family.
And you actually did what they call double headers now. When any game goes before it, you were doing curtain raisers before some big games as well, weren't you?
We were. I made my debut at Thrumhall, and there's not many people can say that, but yeah, I made my debut in a number 2 shirt on the Thrumhall pitch. And it was a France game. It was like, Halifax were playing a game against France, and we thought we'd been put on as a bit of a novelty, and so did everybody else, I think, to begin with, and that. And then when we came out on the field, the folk that had turned up early to watch the men's sides and that, I think they were really taken aback by the standard of rugby league that we're actually playing, and we certainly weren't awed playing in a stadium and on a big pitch and that. And I think there's a fair few blokes to this day would have given anything to have turned out on a Thrumhall pitch at some point.
Absolutely.
During their lives.
Yeah.
And we did it 3 or 4 times, I think. It'd be interesting to see if anybody's got the archive footage from those days, because I know there was some filming done, and whether it was tagged onto the matches that were played for the men's game, and the footage is still there. And that it'd be nice to see that. We've got a few photographs and that which were taken officially on those games, and I have myself. And
there's some fabulous photographs.
A year or 2 later, I returned then as part of the amateur setup. So at the end of the season every year, the Halifax men's side used to play against an amateur side from around the region, and that was to like raise funds for charity. And I was the only female ever allowed to play, and that I played for the amateurs. So there's a few local names back in those days, and that, even like people like who were playing for Keighley Cougars and that at the time. So all the best of the lads that didn't make it professional and were playing for the top amateur side were playing. We lost the game 36-4. but I'm proud to say that it was me that got the 4 points.
Oh, I love it.
For
Love it.
for the amateurs side. I remember being thrown the ball, and I actually handed off Jack Scroby, and to this day I don't think he'd have he wondered what hit him that day. I handed him off, and he was like, after the game, I remember him trying to play it down a little bit and thinking, well, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, did I? And I remember all the lads winding him up and saying, you didn't know what to do. He went, you were out of it, mate. You know what I mean? He went, you didn't know what I did. Yeah. Somebody threw the ball out to me. I just remember picking it up, and I was just head down, running for that line, and it was just like, bang, and off, see you later, and that were it.
So some fantastic support from the club, different because you didn't get funding, but actually they embraced you as a community and you're part and parcel of it. Really interested now because Halifax, and I guess Wakefield are probably there, but to hold the record for being in the first 3 Challenge Cup games, which the Challenge Cup, the first ever one was in 1989, and Halifax was in there against Crossfield, so that was 1989-89, and then you were there the next 2 years. Just tell us a bit more about, I don't want to talk about the results because we don't want to earn too much detail that Halifax never won it, but just tell us about how proud, how you feel around being in that first Challenge Cup at Mayfield and everything that sort of came from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it was a disappointment that we lost all 3, but we won so much over those early years. Winning just that. You've got to remember that a few of the other teams, well, in fact, all of the other teams that were playing that first season or 2 that were in the league, they'd all had some basis behind them, and they'd all been playing games in like mini leagues and the mini league the season before, and the charity games and things like that. And when we established that side, we just hit the ground running and we won the league, and that's hard to do in your first season. And we also won the Guiseley Sevens, and we won other Sevens tournaments, and we held our own tournaments and that. So we come away with probably 7 or 8 trophies within the first couple of seasons. The downside was us losing that Challenge Cup final and then going out again for the next 2 seasons. But we were there and we did it, and we're still part of history, that first game. And like you say, we've got, it's not the greatest title to hold, but yeah, losing the first 3 Challenge Cup.
But actually,
finals.
yeah, of course, I'd forgotten that you'd sort of won so much. And actually, you went in as favourites because I know Crossfield, when you talked to Angie and Bernie at Crossfield, they went, oh, they didn't give us a hope. And in fact, I think you had a squad in the programme of about 25 players, and they just scraped the 11 to going in. So they only just had a team. Pretty amazing, really. But yeah, when you look at the success, I know from my perspective, playing for Fulham women, you were the first team we ever played. You came down to Fulham and absolutely caned us. We played as a curtain raiser before the Fulham game.
Was it 104-0? Was it?
We don't want to know the
that?
score, thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, but going back to that Challenge Cup final, I think the first one against Warrington, it was a heavy pitch, if I remember that day. And we'd got some good players in with a turn of speed. So everybody knows about Lisa McIntosh and the strength that she's got and the power that she's got, and her turn of speed, along with a gifted athleticness itself, and the technical ability and the knowledge in rugby league. And then we had people like Jill Deadman and that we could throw the ball out to on the wing on the 3 quarters and that, and that's how we played. We had our pack that did the graft, but as soon as we could, we threw that ball out, and it was the ball handling, I think, and the fast players that were racking up the points for our team. So we found it hard going, if I remember that day. And it was a battle against the mud, and it was a battle in the pack, and I think we still came out on top all that time. But once they shut us down, and we couldn't throw the ball out anymore, that we tired. It was tired legs that day, and they just had a little bit more strength, and were used to using their pack and everything.
Well, it was a very muddy, wet January, and Mayfield, which is in Rochdale. So the pictures just tell the whole story with the mud and the yuck that actually was going on that day. So I can fully understand that. Tell us a bit more. So you didn't just stop it there. So you're very instrumental in the running of the team, the formation, and the actual team itself. We've got some great stuff of poems you wrote, songs you wrote in your scrapbook, which are just fascinating. But tell us a bit more about sort of county and any other involvement you sort of had, because county began to happen, didn't it, at that time?
Yeah, so quite a number of our players were in the Yorkshire side and that, and I didn't actually play in any of the Yorkshire Lancashire games, none of the Battle of the Roses games. Being a forward, I think we had a bit of an overkill from Yorkshire, I think.
Yeah,
So there's probably Ange from Keighley,
big
quite a few of
Ange.
quite a few of the forwards from Dudley Hill, along with our own, and
Mm,
that we sort of like swapped things around in our own Halifax team within the pack and that, because depending in those days, sometimes we didn't always play 13-13, sometimes it was 9 or 11 aside,
mm,
depending on who could muster what for the teams and things like that. So sometimes in the second rows and stuff we had to drop out
mm.
and be subs and things. So but I do remember going along as part of the squad, and that day at Old Trafford, it was an absolutely packed out Old Trafford. So you're probably talking 40 plus thousand easily watching that day. It was a bright sunny day. The pitch was what you could imagine an Old Trafford pitch to
Carpet.
be. Yes, and we was in the Stretford end, and that cheering on the Yorkshire side, and it was great.
Mm. And it was,
Um,
yeah. And it was just interesting, wasn't it, as the sport was beginning to grow? And you've got pictures as well. So let's talk a bit about your designing of the logo and your songs and things like that you've actually put together, that are all part of the scrapbook. It was all part of the culture, wasn't it?
yeah, so it was like I say, it was all the squad doing everything ourselves and that, and I think we sort of like, whether we realised it or not at the time, we were sort of like pioneering other things as well, and we bought into the fact that we were getting the attention locally in the media and the local rugby league scenes and things like that, and it was Nikki that designed, because she was a graphics designer. She designed the logo, the little like rugby ball shaped player with big eyelashes. And it was nicknamed a twab for some reason. I don't know. I think that was Nicky's name for it. But it became our logo, and that was like our crest. So we had it on the note paper. We had it on the club badges on the t-shirts and polo shirts and things, and the track suits and that. But that sort of like got us noticed. And again, I suppose we were ahead of our time when you see stuff that's happening. And then back in the day, we didn't. Can you imagine if we'd have had social media back in the day, what we
Oh,
could have done to
yeah,
promote ourselves back then,
yeah.
because of how we set everything up? But we just got on with it. And I'd been DJing since I was 13 years old, and it was predominantly based around the pubs and clubs and that in Halifax and Bradford and Leeds in those days, and doing things at Crossley's Bar, which used to be, I don't know if anybody remembers the Noel Edmonds late breakfast show. Those sort of things were filmed, and Hitman and Her was filmed at the Coliseum in Halifax. So being on the crossover in those events and things that were taking place, it was easy to see that how it reflected, and you could market things and that. So we knew that we had something as a bit as a catchment on there. And then I'm not too sure how it worked out with hosting the end of year celebrations. I think it might have been the team who won it. I'm not sure whether we swapped it around, or it was the team who won it had to host this end of season celebrations, how it come about, or whether it was just whoever could be available to have a celebration that year. But I remember we hosted it, and so Nikki designed the little invites, if you like, and all the other social events that we had going on, people's engagements and weddings and things like that. Nikki was doing stuff like that, so which was, that extended family thing within the rugby league community. And with me DJing at the time, like the songs and stuff that we used to have going, we'd have the rugby songs and we'd have stuff, but we all liked our tunes back in those days, and they were always pumping out in the dressing room. and a few of us used to cotton on that I was pretty good at changing lyrics to some of the songs and that in those days. So it was a bit of a pantomime, but a pantomime sort of like tongue in cheek and that. And win, lose or draw, we got our revenge at the end of the season then, because we got up on stage and I'd changed the lyrics to a few well-known songs back in those days, and we sung these songs. We actually performed at these end of season events.
Oh, fabulous.
And
Oh, what memories.
that's what's in the scrapbook. And
Yeah.
I remember you picking up the other day on the on one of the lines when it says or the Dudley Hill ref is blind, dumb and deaf, in reference to some of the contentious, should we say, decisions made in the games earlier on in the season. But it was all fun. It was all fun and a bit of camaraderie and everything. There's never any bitterness, I don't think, between anybody within the women's league. We played against each other, and those 80 minutes on the field, it was like we want to win. And that, but after that, again, it was just that big rugby league family together, and we all celebrated together, whether we won, lost or draw.
And that was very much what it was like after games, but also it became part of the calendar, wasn't it? You said this end of season celebration where eventually it went to Morecambe and then Blackpool, and you talked to any of the women that were involved in that time and how brilliant it was, the community, the women's rugby league community coming together every year.
Yeah, because we were celebrating not just what we'd achieved personally and what we'd achieved as a team, you know, whoever the winners were that season. We just celebrated everybody. It was just women going out there, doing what we wanted to do, you know, training hard, putting the time and the effort in, bringing in the little bits of sponsorship that we did have, bringing in people to take photographs of us playing, people taking videos of us playing, not to, in those days, to analyse anything that was going on. It's just to have those memories of what we did, really, because we knew we had to do it ourselves, because nobody else was ever going to take any real notice and that. But it was, yeah, it was all big family. Rugby league is. I mean, I hope it still is to this day for the women that are going through the ranks, whether they're starting off at somewhere like in those days. As I retired with having my injury and things like that, it was Ellen boxers that were coming through locally. And those teams, I hope the young girls and women's teams that are going through today, I hope they realise that what they've got is a big family and a big community themselves, and I hope they embrace it while it's there for them.
Absolutely. And it is, you talk to them and they have similar stories, very different to how it is now, but how it was then, should I say, but really interesting. So when you then had got your injury, then you started coaching. Tell us a bit about your coaching progression and the work that you did in the sport for quite a while.
Yeah, so I qualified through all my coaching badges as far as could go. I was very lucky that in those days I had Phil Larder and Arthur Keegan as my mentors and taking me through my paces. People like John Keir and Gary H. Price and that were around, the likes of Seamus McCallion and Tony Anderson were all going through their paces as well from within the men's games, and so too were two others. I mean, people forget that the crossover in that time with rugby league and that as well, professionally and coming over from Union and that, like Alan Tate was one of my big Scotland heroes and things like that. We had the Toppings and that of this world. Everybody put the time in and the graft and learnt the coaching and that in those days as well. So it was great to progress through that. And I remember, I think it was my grade twos, I think I was doing over at Castlefield. So across the road from the Castlefield Stadium, there's like a chemical plant and that. And I remember, yeah. And I remember we did the coaching course over there for about 4 or 5 days in a row. And I just remember again, there was another female on one of the coaching courses that I did over there and that, but most of the time it was myself over there, and like I say, a lot of the professionals from the game, and we had so much respect from them, and back in those days and that, but you had to, because you was all in it together, and when you're in that environment, you've got to, if you're going to coach and you're going to do it well, you're going to have to experience what it's like to play in that anyway, in that coaching environment. So I just got stuck in with everything else, whether it was in a scrum or whatever. I remember being sent a few bombs up and that in the training sessions, and a few of the lads been around, and I'll just shout for it and push them out of the way and jump higher than anybody else and catch that ball and that, and just sort of like looking and that, and getting top marks for being able to execute a roach move and stuff like that. So we had that respect because we knew that we could do it. And then I took that back into my coaching, and I was with Greetland all-rounders mainly, but along with that, a few of the young lads from Siddle. So we had some good experiences. We had a few tournaments up at Greetland, and I remember, because I qualified refereeing as well in that, and I remembered there was a Greetland all-rounders for like a whole events weekend, and I'd been coaching a few sides that we'd got from Greetland. I was looking at the under-12s, 14s and 16s. So we had the different teams that I put into the competition, but I was reffing a few of the games and that as well. And when they totted up the marks at the end of the weekend and everything, I came out on top of the refereeing, and they actually gave me the prestigious event at the end of that weekend was the under-17s final. Fantastic. So they gave me the final because of what they'd seen, and they basically just said, look, you're out there, you're talking to the players, you're letting the game flow, and you stood out as refereeing these kids' games head and shoulders, and you deserve to be there. And the comments that were coming back from the likes of Mal Burke and that at that time. So you had some prestigious names out there that were appreciating what you was doing. So I sort of like took that on board, and it galvanized me a little bit more. And a year or two later, still with the Greetlands lads teams, I took them to the first ever tour of London. So there was all 12 to 16-year-olds, maybe even a little bit younger. And we took them down south, most of them the first time in London. I remember we were on sleeping bags on the floor of a scout hall up in Islington. And it was actually just across the road from Highbury Stadium in those days. And one or two of the youngsters thinking that they didn't need chaperoning going up to the McDonald's a few hundred yards up the road. But when they went out in the dark of like 6 o'clock on a like Easter sort of weekend in London, and there's a few local lads hanging around, they all got it on the toes and coming right back to the scout hut and that, Lindsay, can you come to McDonald's with us and that? So but there were, the lads were tough enough and that, and they enjoyed the rugby. We took them on a tour of the RAF museum up at Hendon and that as well, because we played a game up there. Another one, I think it was something like St Mary's, I think, if I remember, at Hemel Hempstead. But we absolutely obliterated every team down south, and that we really run up some scores that day. But some of those lads stayed with us at Greetland for that season and the season after, and I was invited as well then to choose some of the lads to put through to Great Britain's Academy for a couple of seasons when we had the meetings and that. And so a few of the lads that I was coaching and a few that went on to make it through the Siddle ranks and everything, let me see who I can remember. So Mick Shaw and Graham Holroyd were at Siddle. They went on to make it professionally, obviously. And through my coaching up at Greetland, who did we have? We had Danny Seal, made it for Halifax. Lee Milner became part of Huddersfield, and then Johnny Lawless was hooker for a number of seasons over at Sheffield Eagles. So yeah, those lads, we trained them as kids, and we put them through from like 14, 15 years old into the Great Britain academies, and thankfully they knuckled down and they made it professionally, and then of course for Great Britain as well. So I was proud to do that. And through that as well, I was working with Dilwyn Lewis as his assistant Rugby League development officer at Calderdale Leisure Service for a year or so. Unfortunately, Dilwyn was pensioned off with a broken neck. Place was up for grabs. I carried on doing Dilwyn's work for another 6 months on top of the workload that I had. But back in those days, at the higher level, there still was a lot of sexism and misogyny around. I remember, and when the place came up, I didn't even get an interview to replace Dilwyn and become the Rugby League development officer. And they brought a guy in who was a school teacher from Oldham, never played rugby league in his life, didn't have the qualifications that I had in coaching and refereeing anything. And as far as I remember, he was there for about 18 months and he went back to teaching because rugby league just wasn't his thing. And sadly, from that sort of like era onwards, and then Halifax dropped down the leagues and so did all the development and that, and they are where they are today, but not in the Super League.
Absolutely.
So who knows, eh? Who knows?
I know. Who knows if they'd taken the talent that was Lindsay England and the difference you would have made, that you were already making, interestingly, isn't it? And what a missed opportunity they actually had in the Calderdale area, which is just such a shame. And there's lots of stories like that where women are excelling, and then they're not given the opportunity just because of the gender, which is just sad.
But I still seen the lads around there, and I moved away from Yorkshire, and I've been living and working in Manchester for 21 years now. But I still go back to Valley Parade to watch my football team. Still have a season ticket over there, and like I say, I know it's several years since I've watched a Halifax home game, and that I've seen a few of the Salford matches and that in the Super League. But from time to time, when I am back in Halifax or Bradford and the clubs and things over the years, I've bumped into a few folk in the bars and stuff and that, and some of the lads sometimes it's been, and they've always said hello and they've always thanked me and like here's a pint and things like that, thanks for what you did for us as kids and that, and putting us through. So that's, to me, that says it all to me, you know what I mean? That a few years later they can understand what you did and you helped them in their careers and stuff like that. So it wasn't to be for me with me injuries, but
you made a difference to a lot of people's lives.
It was just that grassroots family and that, wasn't it? It's like I can't do it and that, but it went there, and sadly having that injury was what curtailed me my short-lived GB career as well. So as you know from when we was looking at the cuttings and things, the other day there's a photograph of me as part of that first ever 31 player squad that was announced to play for GB for that first ever side. So that was it. It was injury that did it for me.
I know, and when you look at that and the legacy that left, really, yes, they turned up to France and it didn't quite be as it was billed, but actually that was a platform for which we could then build Great Britain in the future, which was interesting. And you were very involved as you were involved in a lot of things. Tell us a bit about the video you made. Was it for Lada that you made the video, the coaching video?
I'm not too sure who it was or how it came about. I just remember somebody from Rugby League shouted out to say they wanted some of the women's players over because there was making a coaching video, and it's like a little promo that was putting about out, I would say, about the Rugby League. It was about 15 minutes long. It wasn't too long, if I remember that. And I remember we had to go over to Headingley. And one or two people are excited about the fact that it was Headingley. Now, I've been to watch Yorkshire play cricket at Headingley and that, but over in that there town that we won't mention. But so there was a few of us that went over. I think Jill might have been there. I think Claire was there. One or two of us weren't really bothered and that. So it was something like a Tuesday night or a Thursday night or something. It was when we weren't training anyway. We went over and a few of the other girls from the other teams around turned up. There weren't too many of us, maybe 9 or 10. And they sort of like set up some scenes and that, and was playing. And I remember being disgusted that the Headingley Rugby League pitch, it was sand, and because you know, we know the saying it's like Blackpool Beach when you stood in the terraces and stuff. It actually was playing at Headingley. It was disgusting. It was like, this ain't grass. Having us rolling around on Blackpool Beach. And we did the bit of filming and that, and we was promised that we was going to be paid for it as well. And I think we was all a little bit gutted that we didn't get the payment, because back in the day it was something like £40 or £50 each. They was signed us up, and we had to sign an affidavit and everything and that to say that we was being used in this promotional video. So we did all the graft. I remember me chasing it up, because I would probably have been club secretary or something that year, and me chasing it up, and we never got that payment to this day. So if you see this at Rugby League, open your ears and you know,
give us our money.
Yeah,
I'd love to find that. I'm going to find that.
You still owe us payment. I did have a copy of it. It was called something like An Introduction to Rugby League. It was on video, but I think my video recorder or whatever I put it in the last time a few years ago, chewed it all up, because I had quite a lot of videos and some old cine films and that as well that I've had transferred onto a CD in more recent years. But I remember the cover. I think it had like an image of like a half drawn colour drawing, a cartoon sort of style drawing of like a rugby league player with a ball.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Running with the ball.
Yeah.
And it sort of like said something like Introduction to Rugby League. And as I say, it was maybe 12, 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
It did feature us quite a bit, and it spoke about, you know, like rugby league's played by women and that these days.
Yeah.
And that, so it was worth doing in the end, and it would, you know, it's still quite an important bit if anybody can dig it out of the archives.
Yeah, I'm looking for that.
At the RFL, it's still good to show youngsters today.
Yeah.
You know, it was okay what we did. It wasn't like a waste of time or anything what we did. It's just one of those things, I suppose.
And I'm interested, and I think it was, and I'm really interested in finding that video, because I think it shows how, you know, with the Old Trafford, with that sort of the coaching courses, and with putting women on, that actually in early doors rugby league was doing that and having some form of equality, although a bit not getting paid for it. But also there was the side of it, wasn't there, where you've got, when you were in the look, and I think, I can't remember which newspaper it was, where they dressed you up in Dorothy Perkins outfits in contrast to you as rugby players. And that was a bit of a theme in the late 80s, 90s, where a lot of the women's rugby teams, they got sponsorship for it or got something for it or publicity, but had to be being taken out of the comfort zone quite a bit.
Yeah, so if I remember rightly, it was the Halifax Courier, and I think it was it Diane Cooper or something her name? So it was like the women's feature editor in the Halifax Courier, and they got in touch with us and said, do you want to do this? And a few of us did. I did, again, 6 or 7 of us turned up as a bit of a laugh, but to do a bit of a feature. But it wasn't Dorothy Perkins, it was Harvey's, which is the poshest shop in Halifax.
Sorry, do forgive me.
It was so they took us down to Peace Hall, and I know, like, Peace Hall's coming into its own these days. There's been some top names playing there as a gig venue the last few weeks.
That, Halifax ladies as well.
And that. So they took us down there. They dressed us up. They basically took us into the shop, into Harvey's, said, like, there's some outfits here, pick what you want. And they took us down and did a photo shoot. So I remember in the day, I went for the most expensive dress and this big floppy hat, like I was out at the day at Ascot or something like that, you know. We got dressed up, we did this bit of a photo shoot, and they took the clothes back off of us and put them straight back on the rolls, and that. Back in Harvey's, poshest shop in town. Don't even dry clean your stuff that's been worn for there. There you go. And then they came down filming, and we've got a few snaps of us, like again, some action shots that they basically just set up certain things, like getting tackled going over the line, or maybe coming out of a scrum or something like that, just to get a little bit more action shots. And it provided the feature on that in the local paper. I'm not sure which angle it was coming from. I'm not sure if it was like these women play rugby league, but the ladies at the end of the day, or these are the local women and that, and this is what they look like when they're going out partying. But guess what? There's another side to them. This is what they're like at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I don't think back then, like we say, even though there was the misogyny and the sexism around, I don't think something like this was intended in that way. I think it was like half and half. It was still trying to promote what we were doing, and how we was doing it, and we just saw it as a bit of a laugh, I think, and just got on with it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that, isn't there? And there's a lot of articles that go on about being feminine or being a hooker, or the language used in that time was really interesting, because they didn't know really. I always say, from my perspective, they didn't know what to do with me, and I think that was the same with Women's Rugby League. They didn't know how to place it or where to place you as players, but it came actually from a good place, as in promotion. But actually, when you look at it, would you dress up in that dress? You're taking away from who you are. Normally, it wasn't you, was it, and your identity, but actually it was good publicity.
Yeah. And then, like, the other way, then promotion, it's so like we was really pushed by the leather services, and it helped with that. Dilwyn Lewis was Rugby League development officer at the time, and after what I did with the local kids tournaments and that, I remember the opportunity came up for a high profile double header. So it was going to be over at Central Park, if I remember, and I can't remember whether it's going to be the Yorkshire and Lancashire Roses game, or whether it was just like the high profile Wigan game. It was something anyway. And I remember Dilwyn put my name forward and that, and he said, look, obviously your knee's what it is and you're not going to be able to play, but you're still quite fit and you can still move a bit. So he put me forward to referee for that game. And it was Maurice Lindsay who had the last say in the end, and just turned it down and just said, no, we don't want any women involved in rugby league, and sort of like brushed it aside and that. And so that was a negative. And the only other negative was if we go back to that match, that amateurs match that I played in, which was probably it was either halfway through my career or towards the end of the career when I played in that game. Apart from scoring, I remember as well that we were defending our own goal line with the amateurs side, and I was on the right hand side of the field, and I had a tendency to work out where the play was going to be, and I drifted behind our goal line, behind the sticks, and then moved left. And I knew that the Halifax players in those days, and that contained the likes of Eddie Riddlesden, who played on the wing. So I knew they was going to miss a pass and throw it out wide. So I looked up after about like the first play of the ball, and I just drifted straight behind our own defence, behind that line. And as Eddie Riddlesden was going over in the corner, I just flattered into him and I took him out. So he didn't even get past the corner flag. I took him out on the sidelines, and we both went crashing into the advertising boards. And apparently he had a shoulder injury for 3 weeks. So the folk at Halifax were best pleased.
Oh, wow.
It was the end of the season for them, but they still had a few certain commitments to play in and that, and obviously getting ready for having like a few weeks off season and then going out and hitting the ground running the next season. But obviously getting injured, so that was it. It was like right, we're not having no women playing a rugby league in our friendly games and charity games ever again, and that. But everybody else just laughed about it, and it was an injury that it could have got from anybody. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, a bloke could have had that same game awareness and done exactly the same, couldn't they?
Yeah. And I mean, the players we're not bothered about it at that time. Like I say, because we all just used to meet up, and especially with me DJing and that, the various clubs and pubs and that in Halifax, the players would always come around and say hello and stuff. There was never anything about it. We were all just mates together. And it was just one of those things. It was just an injury that somebody's, like you say, sustained. Could have happened to anybody.
Yeah.
It just happened to be me. But yeah, that was it.
When you look back, and I think this is where it is, and you see where women's sport is now, and I know you're very involved in sport, and in particular in football, and you look where women's sport is. Do you just look at what your achievements were at that time? Do you look back and look at what you've added to the sport to take it where it is now? Just to sum it up really before we finish.
I was glad I was around in that era that I was. And I think because of my age now, and now I've seen women's football, women's rugby league, and again, like the Olympics and that, and women's sport with elite athletes, I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, and I'm glad that the youngsters today have got a more professional set up around them, an attitude around them, along with what they can bring and to help bring the best out of them. But I think I was lucky that I grew up in that area as well, although I'd missed out on all that, and like folk of my generation and maybe another generation or so in between have missed out. I think it's great to be able to be on that cusp and see that transition, if you know what it was like.
Yeah.
And it's so I'm meeting up with Jill Scott later on today at an event, and Jill's one of those that's played for the Lionesses, and because of her longevity in women's football, she's seen that transition, and she's seen it from being very young and being brought in and had to graft and seen it hard, and then at the very end of her career, thankfully she got something out of it, and still is with a career beyond the playing side of it. It's great to see that transition and move it on, although you might not get not the recognition, it's just the time and the effort that they put in and the graft. There does need to be that remuneration there, pay people, just because we're women doesn't mean we need to be paid any less. Just because the crowds are not there and the money's not thrown around from sponsorship and media attention and things like that, we're not putting any less effort in. We're still women, we're still growing up, we have a love of the games and the sports that we're playing, we're going out, we're doing the graft, we're doing the training, we're putting the time and the effort in, we've got the talent, bring that talent out and, expand on that talent, but just pay us the same, just like in any society role, what you're doing, whether it's a job, whether it's a semi-professional role, or whether it's something else, even within communities that are charitable based, and that you'll know yourself, Julia, or all the grafting that you put in yourself. Just pay people what they're worth.
Absolutely. And that is so true, isn't it? And that's the next step. It's actually recognizing and this project, why it's so close to my heart and why it's fantastic that I'm meeting people like you, and you are a pioneer. You're a pioneer not just of rugby league but of women's sport, and also we haven't even touched the fantastic work you do on LGBT T and Q, the fantastic work you do around that, which I think is a whole new probably Zoom of all the fantastic you work with Just a Ball Game. That you are a pioneer, you do so much, and it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for this interview. You've given so much and so much context to the social history at the time and how it was, but also how important that community of rugby league was to Halifax, but also to everyone involved. So thank you so much for your involvement and for telling us your story.
Thanks for getting in touch in the first place, Julia, and reconnecting me with my short-lived rugby league career that I had all those days ago.
Short-lived, but very impactful. So
but I'm sure when we get round to sorting out the videos and that of the game, we'll have a little bit more of a presence on through the media outlets and that, and people can actually see and relive it with us what we did.
It'll be fantastic, won't it? Thank you.